Welcome back to the Malt Miller YouTube channel, Homebrewers. In this video, we're actually going down a slightly different route to some of our usual videos and the way we do things. And the reason for that is we want to talk to you today about absolutely maximising your chances when you enter a homebrew competition.
So before we get into the guts of this video, let's crack open this beer here that was very kindly sent to us by our great friend Brett Harmon, who obviously we did the brew with on our Brew With You series. Yep. This is his Elderon Red IPA.
Yeah, I can't wait to crack this open. It's a very good example as well, given what we're talking about today in terms of posting beers to us, because Brett actually posted this to us following the trip we made to brew that beer with him, right?
Yeah, and this is what partly what we're going to be speaking about how to get the beer to the competition, the people that are running the competition in the best way. And we're going to go right from actually planning your brew, brewing your beer, packaging your beer, and the really important one is how to send it to the competition, which is really important. And you don't want to do all the hard work and then fail at the last bit, which is sending.
No, absolutely not. I mean, before we jump into all of that, I mean, just look at the colour on that. It's absolutely glorious, Brett. You did a real good job with this. Nice creamy head on top of it. And this has been with us for a while now as well,
yeah,
right?
Been in the fridge, yeah.
And it still looks absolutely stunning. So cheers.
Oh, it's tasting great as well. Absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, full of hops. Still full of hops as well after all this time. So let's get into some of the nitty gritty then, Rob. We'll kind of break this down into three key areas like you've already said. But before we do that, just some thoughts on, like, generally, if you're planning to enter a homebrew competition, you know, some of the things you should be looking at. Because the reason we want to do this is, first and foremost, we actually run competitions here. We regularly run them a couple of times throughout the year, but also we're lucky enough to be invited to some of the big competitions that happen, whether that's just to go along and like spend time with the people there or actually try some of the beers and be involved with some of the judging. And it takes investment from all of you at home when you enter a competition. You know, you're putting not only your time, effort and energy into brewing that beer, but also for the majority of competitions, you need to pay to enter. And that fee covers kind of the costs to run those competitions, right?
Well, you want to make the absolute most of the beer that you're sending, so you put yourself in the best possible position to do well within that competition. But that does take some planning.
It does, absolutely. So the first thing that we would say is, if you're planning to enter a competition, read the rules. Right?
Yeah, because the rules definitely are different for all the competitions. A lot of them are run by BJCP. So they tend to be the same, but there will be nuances within that. Perhaps how to label the bottles or the amount of bottles to send. There'll always be nuances.
Some competitions are now allowing cans to be entered as well.
Some aren't.
And some aren't, right? And also, you know, there will be particular things about your competition as well that stand out. Some of the really big competitions that are run throughout the UK and further afield, they're all broken down into style-based competitions. So making sure you're familiar with the style of beer you're going to be entering into which category is really important.
Yeah, because your beer's being judged on that style, and if it sits outside of that style, you're just losing points straight away.
You are, yeah. And no matter, it might be an amazing beer, but if it's not within those style guidelines, yeah, like you say, you are losing points potentially straight away. So checking the style guide for the beer that you're going to be brewing is our first thing that we would always say you need to do. The next thing is all about planning, right? We would always recommend as well that you don't just submit a beer that you've got knocking around.
Yeah, it rarely works.
Yeah.
It rarely works.
You can have issues, can't you, right? If that beer's been sat in a keg or in bottle for a while, you might have had one bottle if you've been bottle conditioning that was fantastic. The next ones that you're going to send, you don't know whether there could be an issue with them unless you open them, right?
And actually we saw that in our last competition.
Yeah.
Yeah, good first bottle in the first round, poor one in the second round.
Yeah, so, you know, really plan your brew. Think about the beer that you're going to brew. plan the recipe, take your time with it. You know, if you know that the competitions are coming up, and there are some really good calendars out there that show you kind of the competitions that are happening throughout the year, take your time to think about the ones you want to enter and plan your beer to enter into that competition well in advance. Obviously use fresh ingredients, use enough of the ingredients for the given recipe. You know, if you're thinking about like yeast, and we'll come on to some of this in a bit more detail, but use the right amount of yeast. You know, don't shoot yourself in the foot at the first hurdle.
Yeah, and again, judging the competitions, we've seen a lot of many entries that are obviously they've not used enough yeast. You get that yeast stress and it just throws off flavours.
Yeah. I think it's worth noting, right, that actually the standard of entry we're seeing across all the competitions we're either involved with or that we run has been improving.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you can see that in the score sheets. You know, some of the big competitions that we're part of kind of planning or being involved with, or that we're sponsors for, will have said to us over the last couple of years that generally the average scores are going up, which is great because that means that everybody at home's skills are improving, and that's what we want to see, right?
So once you've planned your beer that you're going to brew, and this is a really important point, many of the beer styles don't need aging. So send the freshest beer you can possibly send. So in that planning, make sure that the beer's not going to be hanging around for a long time before packaging, or even after packaging, because actually the freshest beer is, in most cases, is the best. There's a few styles that need aging, but there's not many.
Yeah. So what we're going to do now is jump into part one, which is where we're going to look at some of the really common brewing faults that we've seen and that show up in some of the competitions that we're involved with. And there's none more frustrating for judges and actually for entrants than the first one we're going to talk about. And it's close to your heart because you can sniff it a mile away, and it's diacetyl.
Yeah, and it's a funny one because not everyone can taste diacetyl, so it's always a good idea to get a mate to also check your beer, because yeah, if you're one of those people that can't smell it or taste it whatsoever, then yeah, you're never going to be able to pick up that fault.
Now, diacetyl is that butterscotch kind of Werther's Originals, Butterkiss popcorn smell and flavour that can show up in some beers, and it's formed at 2 points generally within the fermentation, in some styles, not in all styles, but in some, and it's caused by yeast. So it is a byproduct of yeast as it's going through the fermentation process. It will then be completely cleaned up by itself, given enough time. So we've done a video about how to do a forced diacetyl test, so we would recommend that you watch it. We'll pop it up here for you to take a look at, but it's relatively easy to get around, and where it tends to show up the most is in big hoppy numbers, right?
Yeah, because you get that re-fermentation when you get a big dry hop add, so that's something to really watch.
Yeah, it's because when you add those dry hops, there's an enzymatic breakdown of some of the longer chain sugars that are present in the beer. You get a re-fermentation, and that then causes sometimes a thinning out of the beer, but will also cause diacetyl to be reformed. Again, it will pass with time, but we would suggest if you're packaging a dry hopped beer for a competition, consider using something like ALDC when you add the dry hops. So do a forced diacetyl test after fermentation, add your dry hops, add ALDC at the same time, because it might be tasting great out of your keg, but when you've put it in a bottle and it's been in the courier network and warmed up again, then that's when you can get a re-fermentation in the bottle. You can end up with overcarbonation, you can end up with a thin beer, you can end up with diacetyl. It won't be the beer that you were tasting out of the keg. So that would be probably the first one, because we see it
first
the most.
Biggest,
yeah. The next is going to be overcarbonated beer. And you can take what we've said in the first bit here about hop creep and re-fermentation in the bottle and consider that to avoid overcarbonation. But just generally, overcarbonated beer can be a killer, can't it?
Yeah, it completely thins the beer out. You'll lose stacks of points. It's not going to be anything like a well-scoring beer if it's overcarbonated.
No. So check your beer before you package it. Make sure that maybe if you're packaging from a keg, that you haven't accidentally had your regulator on too much, and you've put too much carbon dioxide into the beer.
This dips back into packaging as well, which we'll dip in and out of all the way through this video. But if you're packaging beer from a keg because you want to package bright beer, that's absolutely fine, but it's got to be done in the correct way. And we do see where people will get like a party tap type setup, and they will put the party tap in the bottle and fill it up, and oxidation issues and amongst a whole stack of others that can go by that. So yeah, just be very careful how you packaged your beer out of a keg.
That leads me nicely onto the next one on our list when we talk about brewing faults and its oxidization. That can be an absolute killer, right?
Yeah, but it can range. So the smallest amount of oxygen contact, what it does is it starts to dull the aroma and especially the hop flavour, but it also alters the malt flavour of the beer. Slightly more oxidation, it can sort of taste a bit musty. After that, you start getting the wet cardboard and sherry type flavours, which are just not wanted in practically every style of beer. So that is one of the really important ones.
I mean, when you're brewing a big juicy like New England Pale or IPA as well, it can go from being that gorgeous light pale yellow orange colour to basically looking like pond water.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
It goes grey, it goes dull, and it's just soul destroying when we see those kind of beers come through with that.
And some of the most expensive beer styles there are to make as well, so it's even more gutting when that happens.
And it really comes down to like your packaging methods predominantly. So transferring from your fermenter into your keg, if you're kegging, really trying to work on making sure that you don't have oxygen pickup in any of the lines, using, closed loop transfer methods if you've got a pressure fermenter. All these things you can do to try and minimize oxygen contact with the beer before it gets into your keg is absolutely vital. The next one is clarity, right? So we just talked about hazy and juicy IPAs, where actually you want very little clarity. You want that to be thick, juicy and hazy. But when we talk about beer styles that should be bright, one of the things we see quite regularly is that they're not bright.
Yeah.
If we take this example here from Brett, I mean, it's deep dark copper red in colour, but you hold it up to the light.
Yeah, it's crystal.
It is absolutely crystal clear.
So if your style is meant to be clear, really it needs to be clear when they're judging it, because otherwise you're going to, again, lose points.
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting. A lot of people think that, just going back to bottle conditioning, a lot of people think that they can't bottle condition a beer for competition entry because it's going to be in the courier network and then it's going to be shifted about in the where the competition's being held. I'm not so sure about that, because generally, I say generally, places where you're sending your beer for competition are cold storing, and they are aware that they need to be gentle with the beer.
Yeah, they'll care, right?
They care.
And there are things you can do as well during brew day to make sure that clarity is as good as possible. Making sure that during your mash, you're, if possible, doing some recirculation to really brighten up the wort at the end of the mash.
Correct yeast for style.
Yeah, correct yeast for style. Enough yeast as well, that plays into it. Things like kettle finings. There's loads of different options out there, but kettle finings, adding finings into the fermenter, adding finings into the keg.
Beer clarity is a massive subject all on its own. It ranges right through the brewing process. We're talking about pH and various different things, water and the whole lot. We would take all day to cover it all, and there's much more for us to learn as well. But however, in the planning stage, that needs to be
absolutely. And if your beer needs to be bright, do everything you can to make sure it's bright.
Exactly. James, we could sit here and mumble on all day about hundreds of different types of brewing faults. I think that the takeout is that do your planning, know what you're brewing, know where the pitfalls are, and do everything you can to avoid them.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's so many tools available now to us as homebrewers, and there's so much knowledge out there on brewing faults and process aids to help you with them, that you can overcome almost everything.
Let's now look at actually packaging your beer and where that can go wrong.
Yeah, because we do see some errors with that, you know, some things that go awry. Now, a couple of them we've already kind of touched on, like overcarbonation or undercarbonation in your beer. There's a few things that play into that we haven't really talked about. And one of the biggest one is choosing your bottle types that you're going to be sending beer in. Now, there are competitions that are allowing canned entries as well, but some of this applies across both.
Yeah.
When we talk about choosing your vessel, should we say, to send it in, we've got a few different options, right? So we've got glass bottles, we've got swing top bottles, we've got plastic bottles, we've got plastic crown cap bottles, and we've got cans, you know, and within that, there's 100 different types of each of them as well, right?
Yeah, definitely. Let's look at screw top plastic bottles, because they are a really popular choice for sending competitions, because obviously people are worried about breakages. We'll talk about that a little bit later on.
Yeah.
So they are easier, somewhat easier to courier.
Yeah.
However, they do have some pitfalls.
They do.
Now, what we are seeing is people reusing PET bottles and reusing the caps. Now, I would say at the very least, brand new cap on a PET bottle.
Yeah, again, this is about maximising your chances and not really wasting the money that you've paid on your entry, you know. If you can get your hands on some brand new caps, brilliant. If you can get your hands on, you know, a box of brand new bottles with caps that are like your competition ones that you just put to one side, that's a great option because they're relatively cheap. But a lot of the plastic bottles now in the caps have the same oxygen scrubbing barrier that you find on crown caps, which we'll come on to. Now, those oxygen scrubbing barriers have a lifespan.
Yeah, they only last once.
Yeah.
You can't reuse them.
So you instantly putting yourself at a disadvantage, because if you've ended up with oxygen in the neck, then that's going to end up in the beer.
Exactly, but also there's another thing on using a brand new cap, because the person that is actually going to be drinking your beer, they know that it's a brand new cap.
Yeah.
You know, it's got the security seal on it when you undo it, and it's just a more, if you're judging a competition, it's just a more satisfactory way.
It's reassuring, isn't it?
It's reassuring,
yeah. And you know, that leads on to crown caps. Now, not many people do this, but we have seen people reusing crown caps.
Yeah.
You know, and again, the same thing applies. Can you guarantee you're going to get the right seal? Can you guarantee that oxygen scrubbing barrier is going to do its job? I don't think you can if you're reusing a crown cap. And for the cost of a crown cap versus the cost of the entry, buy some crown caps. The other one is underfills.
Yeah, and we see this quite a lot, and I think that there are a certain amount of, or where this can come from, if you're bottling using a bottling stick, there are actual stainless steel bottling sticks available, and when you withdraw the bottling stick out of the bottle, it just leaves too much headspace. So we're right down here on the neck, and it wants to be the correct height.
Yeah, I mean, this beer that Brett sent us, the bottles fall right up to the neck, you know, so he's packaged this using the correct method.
As you would see in a commercial beer.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that's noted when you're judging as well, you know, overfills, underfills, it's got to be right.
Right, what about swing top bottles, Rob?
Okay, we have seen a few swing top bottles that we've received in here where the tops have come off in the courier system, which is absolutely gutting. They're also tend to be thicker, they tend to be heavier. They're fine for packaging, you've just got to really think about it.
Yeah.
I would always put some tape over the top to stop the swinger being able to come open. Definitely my preference would be glass bottle crown caps.
Yeah, I think that based on the beers we've judged and seen in competition, the ones that always tend to stand out in terms of the quality tend to be in a glass bottle, tend to be with a crown cap.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean that other entries can't be great or be considered or even win. It's just we're stacking the odds in our favour when we use, you know, correct fill, correct bottle, correct cap.
Obviously the same applies to cans as well, so we are seeing more and more cans coming in on competitions, and that's absolutely fine. You've got a cap on the foam. You've got a cap on the foam so that the beer level is right in the can. An underfilled can tend to feel a bit squishy. They just don't feel right.
Yeah.
You know straight away that it's an underfill. So yeah, the same applies to cans.
Why is it important to cap on foam?
Because you're eliminating as much oxygen out of the can as possible.
Yeah, because that foam's full of CO2, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Cool. So those are our kind of thoughts on like packaging things that we've seen over some recent competitions. Right, so we're on our third section now, which is actually submitting your entry, sending it in for judging. And this can be as important and needs as much thinking about as all of the other steps. The first thing we want to touch on is labeling.
Again, back to what we said at the start of the video, is read the competition rules, because the competition rules on most of them state they don't want any excess labels on the beer at all. There'll just be certain amount of information that needs to be on the bottle, and that's it. So as a judge, I would be sat here, I have a bottle presented to me, and it's got a Theakson's Old Peculiar label on it that's been sort of tried to be hacked off, and then it's got a label that's stuck over it, and it's also got some embossing on the bottle, and yeah, that's not ideal.
No.
It's not really what a judge wants to be. It's not a great start.
No, it's not a great start. And actually, Brett, one thing you've fallen down on here is one thing that is definitely not within the rules. It's identifiable information. We know this has come from you because it says Homebrew on the front of it.
Anything that is identifiable and the stricter competitions will just, the bottle's gone.
Yeah. So certain things, like, people will want to put their mark on it because they're proud of what they've done, and we get that, you know. And there are some competitions, and we've seen them over the years, that will say, you know, artwork is also considered.
Yeah.
It's outside of BJCP, but you know, there will be some competitions that aren't BJCP that will say, you know, we're going to assess your artwork as well. If your competition says do that, do it. If it doesn't, don't.
Yeah.
The other thing that actually we were talking to the folks that are organising the UK National Homebrewing competition recently, one of the things that they've said that actually stands out when it comes to labelling is thinking about condensation on your bottles.
Yeah.
You know, because if you stick a label onto the bottle when it's really cold with sellotape, that label is then going to be in contact with condensation and probably going to melt away. Or at least the ink's going to run.
Definitely. The best way to do it is to print out the label, cut it out, stick it inside like a little polythene baggie, and then elastic band that to the bottle.
Yeah, absolutely. Or just wait, you know, wait until a point where there's no condensation left and then stick it on. But equally, it's then going to go into a chiller at some point, you know.
Yeah,
so I love your idea of using a sealed plastic environment, banding it on. You know, if you've got a laminator at home, use a laminator, and then tape that on, but just something so that your label arrives so that they can tell it's your beer.
Yeah.
Right, and then the big thing is that making sure that you, when your beer leaves your control, you've done what you can to make sure it arrives there in the best possible way. Right, Rob?
This is a really important one. So you also need to think about the people that are going to be unboxing your beer at the location, and this can be a massive problem. I know competitions before have ended up with so much packaging materials, and it can be wasteful, and it can take an awful lot longer to unpackage the beer than it really needs to, because people do tend to go to town because they think that's the best way to get their beer there without it breaking.
Yeah, maximising their chances.
Yeah. So actually, we really need to look at this because it really helps out the competition organisers. We want as minimal amount of packaging in the boxes as possible.
Yeah.
And actually, one of the best ways to do it is to get flat cardboard. So get an old cardboard box, flatten it out, and roll the bottle in the cardboard, and then simply one bit of tape just holds the bottle in place within the cardboard tube. Put that in a box with your other entries. Then you can have a small amount of packaging within that box to stop them moving around.
Yeah.
But really, you want to use a box that fits the bottles that you're sending.
Yeah, I
so
mean,
that you don't have to then cram it full of packaging.
One of the things that really helps as well is if you've got the ability to get your hands on like the boxes that beers get shipped in, you know, if you've got like a beer subscription or you order from a brewery, that packaging material is perfect because it all slots together.
Well, yeah, they know exactly how to package beer because they do it all day, every day.
Exactly, yeah. Now, the one bit of advice we had from, again, some people we've been working with was if you can shake the box and you can hear and see things, like feel them rattling around, it's not packaged properly.
Yeah.
If you can pick the box up, shake it, and there's no movement, you're more than likely to succeed with your entries being shipped. Generally, whilst we can't talk about all of the couriers specifically, generally the thing that will break a bottle is another bottle smashing into it as it's being chucked around because it's loose. So protecting against that is a really good way to start.
So couriers themselves, who to send with? A lot of couriers now don't accept liquids, and I can understand why, to be fair. However, Parcel Force on their 48-hour service, they do. So you can send as many 500ml bottles in one package as you like using that service. It's so easy, just take it to the post office, job done. And actually, in our experience of having bottles sent in, they are the ones that have been actually really successful. You know, very low breakage rate, and on a 48-hour service, is relatively quick to get here as well. So it's straight from your cold store straight into the cold store at the competition organisers.
Right, so that kind of wraps up like our thoughts on how you can make the most of that investment that you make when you buy an entry to a homebrewing competition. You know, we want to see the standards grow, we want to see the quality of homebrew grow, we want you to feel really fulfilled with your hobby and get great feedback. Rob, out of everything we've talked about here, or maybe not, what would be your one big bit of advice to give anybody watching this video so that they can maximise their chances in homebrew competition?
Firstly, I would say buy Brewing Classic Styles by Jamil and read it cover to cover, because it really goes into every single style that you can, more or less every single style that you can enter a competition in, but it gives you the pitfalls and what to look out for in every beer style, along with recipes for every single brewing style. It's just an awesome research tool that we still, on a daily basis, go back and read.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of bedtime reading for us here at the Malt Miller. My one bit of advice would be, don't use Panda Pop bottles. Like, actually, we kind of make light of it sometimes, but you are doing yourself a disservice.
Yeah, definitely.
You are almost guaranteed to be flushing the money that you've paid for your entry down the drain. So that's at one end of the spectrum, like right the way down on the kind of spectrum of, you know, where you could go wrong. But also think about all of the stuff we've said here today, and it all comes back to planning, right? Comes back to planning. Brewing Classic Styles, great place to start your planning. Make sure brew day's done well, plan your fermentation, plan your packaging. All of those things will pay dividend in the long run. And I would strongly suggest, if you are looking to enter competitions, start really digging into water chemistry, because it pays so much in terms of the individual styles that you're going to be looking at. We're going to do some content on water profiles and calculating water profiles in the future. It's in the planning stages now, so make sure that you subscribe so that you don't miss that, and we'll absolutely take you through that journey. But it's a massive topic, so we're not going to dive into it here.
I also don't like it very much.
No, you don't. No, it's always James. What are we doing with the water today?
So here at the Malt Miller, we absolutely love hosting competitions, and we love entering competitions. It's a massive part of brewing, and it can teach you so much. I hope this video has given you some either inspiration or just some tips and tricks to how to get your entry to the competition and judged in the best way possible.
Yes, maximising that score sheet, right? Awesome. Well, look, if you've enjoyed this video and you want to learn more, make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel, hit the bell below for notifications, and give this video a thumbs up. Also, you can keep up to date with everything we're doing here at the Malt Miller via Facebook, Instagram, X, and also TikTok. Have a great brew. Cheers.